Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. This is going to be a fairly short post because I'm going to be talking about a fairly short novel, actually a novella, but a very wonderful and curious one. And the title is In the Cafe of Lost Youth by Patrick Modiano. Patrick Modiano is a French author, very prolific. It looks as if many of his works have been translated into English. This is the English version of this one, of course. In fact, this one won the Nobel Prize in literature. This would have been back in 2007, I believe, is when it was published. It was translated into English about 10 years later. This book was very much an impulse buy. This is one of those books. You're in the checkout line at your favorite bookstore or a used bookstore, and you look, and suddenly there's a book on the shelf that just somehow attracts your attention, and you throw it on the pile, or you're about to hit the complete my order button on if you're ordering something online, and there'll be an ad for another book will come up, and you'll think, well, why not? Throw that one on there too. That's what this book was for me. I knew nothing about it. Something about it appealed to me though, and I'm glad I got it. I'm glad I read it. So I said it's a novella. It's just a little over 100 pages. I read it in just a couple hours or so. I put it down and then come back to it. And as I got more deeply into it, the more powerful an impact it had on me. Generally speaking, the story takes place back in the 1960s, early 60s, late 1950s, and it's focused around a cafe in Paris where this group of people meets on a regular basis, or informally, I should say, and they're mostly young people in their 20s. There are a couple of older people there, kind of patriarchal figures or matriarchal figures that are sitting there. And it's a cafe. They sit and they drink and they smoke and they talk about things and they laugh and they get goofy and crazy. As I was reading that, I realized that a cafe in Paris is not too dissimilar to a neighborhood tavern in Chicago or New York City or any large city. The neighborhood bar where all the regulars get together once in a while and they drink too much and they listen to too much music and they get too crazy, and then they all disperse into the night, and then they come together again the next weekend to do it all over again. And some will come throughout the week to do the same thing. And a lot of neighborhood bars will attract a younger crowd. That's what a cafe in Paris is like. Some of them attract a younger crowd. And they come in there with their hopes and their dreams and their attitudes and trying on different identities and personalities, and crazy things can happen, and sometimes wonderful things can happen, and sometimes very tragic things can happen. In this book, it's written from the point of view of four different characters, and they kind of alternate throughout the book. It isn't really divided into chapters, but it is divided into sections, and each section, the narrator is a different character, one of the regulars at this particular cafe. And of course, they see things a little differently from each other. There are a lot of characters mentioned in this book, especially early on, by name, but you never really hear much else about them. They're just kind of these shadowy figures in this cafe. And also early in the novel, Modiano mentions a lot of streets in Paris by name. And it's almost like a catalog of streets in a certain part of Paris. I've only been to Paris a few times in my life, and never for more than 5 days at a time. And so that was kind of lost on me. I wasn't sure what he was doing, and it did get kind of distracting for a little while until I realized that one of the characters in the book it has an obsession with plotting people on maps, placing people in their proper neighborhoods, and then tracing their movements as they make their way to this particular cafe. So I think Modiano was trying to draw a connection between that character and the way things are described in this book. It's something that certainly bears a lot more scrutiny. But for my purposes, there was something else about this book that really struck me, and in fact, very deeply at that. One of the characters in this book is a young woman by the name of Luki, or at least that's her nickname. She does have a different name. But the people there know her as Luki, and she's kind of a mysterious figure. She's a young girl, and the men are all interested in her. She kind of keeps her distance, and then it seems like there is another man in her life. She kind of fades in and out of focus And then in one section of the book, she gets to tell her own story. And it was quite different than it might have seemed, but it seemed very, very sad. And at the end of the book, one of the narrators actually gets much closer to Lukey. They develop something of a relationship. And then one day, let's just say she flies away. And then that character kind of wanders off on his own. He gets away from the cafe. He begins to develop his own life and his own interests. And the cafe and all the people in it just become this fading memory. And then at the very end of this book, that character returns to the neighborhood and to where that cafe was. And it's been a considerable period of time, 30, 40 years. And as he's walking down the street, the cafe isn't there anymore. It's been converted into some kind of gift shop. And all the people on the street, he doesn't recognize any of them. He can barely remember the names of the people that he used to run with decades earlier when he was a regular at this particular cafe. And Lukey, she's just gone. Here's how this novel touched me so much. Years and years ago, when I was in my 20s, I lived on the north side of Chicago in a little side street off of Devon Avenue near Loyola University. And there were a couple of bars, neighborhood bars that attracted a younger crowd. I was in my 20s. These were my people. And we would get together. Some of these bars stayed open very, very late. We would drink too much, listen to too much music, get too crazy, then disperse into the night and then return again to do it all over again the next weekend. And it was a fascinating cast of characters, everyone acting more important than they were. And of all the people at this one particular bar, there was one woman in particular who was very attractive, and she attracted a lot of attention to herself. I did develop something of a relationship with her, but it never really went anywhere. And then after a while, after maybe a couple of years of this, I kind of drifted away from that bar, got on with my life. I met a woman who I fell in love with. We got married. We bought a house out in the suburbs, raised a family. And then just a couple of years ago, I happened to be driving through the old neighborhood, and the bar that I used to hang out at was now an annex of a local hardware store. There was a hardware store in the corner, and where the bar was now part of the hardware store. And then there was another neighborhood bar kind of across the street, and it wasn't even there anymore. It was just a vacant lot. And I was kind of looking down the length of Devon Avenue. It was very crowded. I didn't recognize anybody. And I couldn't even remember the names of the people that I used to hang around with or even their faces. And that woman that I was interested in, I don't know whatever happened to her. I kind of don't want to know. But when I was reading the close of this book, how this book ends, I very much identified with it. It really touched me to my heart. This is a very bittersweet book. It's about loss. It's about memory. It's about the changes people go through and how time changes all of us. And I think many of you out there, especially those of you who are my age or around my age, might recognize yourselves in this particular novel. It's just wonderful. And it just stirs up some ghosts and also some fond, but bittersweet memories. So anyway, in the Cafe of Lost Youth by Patrick Modiano, I strongly recommend it. And that's all I've got for you today. So talk to you later.